Howdy. How are we doing? I know a lot of folks are asking, what do we do now? And I think as creative humans, the biggest answer is to double down on our desire to create. Even if we don't necessarily want to take on the word artist yet, our creative actions are really important. And in doing so, I think it's also super important that we focus on sharing this impulse with our community. Today, I'm going to share a little story with y'all, show you some of this painting here that I am working on, and give you some prompts to consider ways to connect with others and to the idea of utopia. Sound cool? Intrigued? All right, let's get into it. It's fall here in Northern California, the very beginning of our rainy season, and the time of year where I often feel the most inspired and excited to go out in nature. Cold, rainy weather makes some people want to snuggle up inside, but not me. Some of my favorite times to hike are in the pouring rain, covered in mud, trudging through marshlands, and climbing up big rocks to watch birds hunt. You can't get away from the smell of these moments, the pungent fragrance of compost and the earth in rebirth. The sight of mushrooms popping up for the first time in a long while, the lichen and mosses springing back to life in lime greens and chartreuses. It's unexplainable. It's magic, and it helps me recenter in the present when the future feels scary and uncertain. The first piece of advice I can give you is to commit to going outside more. Yes, it is getting cold. Yes, it will be uncomfortable at times, but I swear to you, moving helps, especially if you're consuming a bunch of future-oriented doomer content right now. Please, go outside. I personally am being served up so many think pieces and video essays and podcasts on Project 2025 and the danger of being myself, but truly, that stuff immobilizes me. It puts me in a state of freeze, and I retreat in fear. Going on walks, even short ones, around my neighborhood and paying attention to the trees, changing color, or saying hi to all of the cute dogs on my walks, it makes me feel better. Being out in nature reminds me of this earth I'm connected to and its many occupants who go on persistently blooming, regardless of what is on the news, social media, or other source of crisis and anxiety. The birds and trees and mushrooms are persisting, and so can you. The other thing to really focus on in this moment is connection. This past week, I have called more friends than I have in a long time, as I have been working on this painting that you see here. I've been reaching for phone calls and connection instead of my usual forms of time passing, podcasts, video essays, and audiobooks. I know many of you are like, no way, I need to just quietly focus. That's the point of my art. And I get it. Sometimes it is harder to talk to friends while you work. It's harder to multitask. But I promise you, it is worth the extra effort and you will feel better. I really miss having a collective studio group, like the one I had back in the day at the drugstore in Kansas City. A studio can typically be a place of isolation, and that isolation itself can be healing. But I think it's important to try and make doses that are balanced between connection and retreat. It can be really fun to talk to your friends about what you're working on. This particular painting is inspired by an old Jeep I spotted rusting out on a trail in Pacifica back in September. This hike crossed varying loops, some of which were hiking-only trails and others fire roads. This one was pulled off to the side of one of those fire roads. This Jeep had all of its electronics and gas parts, such as the engine, removed, but the rest of the steel frame was left to decompose. Watching the ferns and chaparral take over, growing in and around the wreckage, feels like such an important symbol of persistence right now. What does it mean to feel hopeful or consider things like utopias in times of crisis? This image reminded me of the Becky Chambers series called Monk and Robot. The novellas are set in a utopian solarpunk future, where humans are rebuilding and living peacefully after artificially intelligent robots rebelled and no longer wanted to be cogs in the humans' economic machine. The story follows a young T-monk, born years after this rebellion, who befriends a robot after foolishly hiking deep out into the woods. The narrative conjured images like this in my head of overgrown ruins, of bits and pieces of civilization that were retaken by nature. It also made me think of this show I used to watch with my dad growing up called Life After People. It would imagine 3D renderings of years after humans deserted large major cities. It was a scary thought. It's where I learned about the power of kudzu in Atlanta. It was a show that was premised on essentially imagining Earth after human extinction, but the imagery was always so poignant to me. It would fill my dreams. It would keep coming back. It was stunning to see the ways in which nature and the Earth persisted. Now, I'm not wishing for apocalypse, but I think it's important to look at both utopian and dystopian ideas as places for us to imagine what could happen and how we can be more resilient in the present moment. I'm currently rereading the Parable series by Octavia Butler, and it's a good one, but it's also heavy. The novel itself is set in 2024, right after the election, and it is making me realize that things are not as bad as they could be. Back to the painting. The chaparral in Pacifica was on a hilltop overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Unbothered by the presence of the worn-down Jeep, this bush kept growing, twisting itself to interlock with other plants around it and grow right through the steel. It reminds me of those poppies, dandelions, and other plants often seen as weeds that can grow through cracks in concrete, on craggy rocks and cliffs. My friends and I were united in thinking about what it means to grow and change together, like the chaparral, despite the roadblocks, fears, and pushback we might run into. These conversations I've been having were transformative and hopeful. It allowed me and my friends to feel seen and heard around these fears and trepidations. They were reminders within my community that we can do hard things, and we have been here before. We discussed what it means to take it day by day, what it will take to continue supporting one another. It was a reminder that a large symptom of my feelings of despair are coming directly from social media-induced senses of loneliness and isolation. I often think of checking in on my people as watching their stories, reading their SUBSTACKs, and browsing their shop updates. But is that really checking in? We all have much deeper needs right now, and as much as I want it to be, our community depth isn't always universal. While I have had hours-long calls to process grief with my fellow queer humans and the chronically ill folks that I've built community with, I know that these brief moments require work and scheduling and cultivation. I have been working on trying to schedule and cultivate community over on Discord for the past 4 months or so, and it's hard. I recognize that the platform is a little wonky, it's difficult to use at times, and unfortunately, it's not the most accessible. But I've been hosting these free bi-weekly creativity meetups there, and they've been really awesome. I want to keep doing them, and I want to keep them free for as long as I can. I'm shifting those to not only existing on Discord, and now they're going to be happening on Zoom too. And it's shifting from a bi-weekly model to now weekly. I realize that my time spent in the studio, as it is likely the case for most artists, is a lonely time. It can also be hard, as it surely is for me when I have a full teaching schedule to prioritize time to make. The concept of these sketchbook/creativity clubs is to simply show up and carve out that time to make together. I've been inviting people to cook, doodle, knit, crochet, draw on an iPad, sketch, paint, anything that resonates. We've had musicians show up, writers, people who consider themselves artists with a capital A, and folks who see themselves as hobbyists and dabblers. They're going to be happening every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific through the 17th of December. And then I'll pause for the holidays. I plan to continue these in the new year, but might switch up the days or times depending on the needs of the community. And again, these sessions are free. I am writing a lot more on Substack and finding it easier to post weekly there. I recently decided to stop making and posting reels to Instagram, and now I just post static posts and stories there. and that free time that I have has allowed me to spend a lot more of it painting and writing weekly over on Substack. But I'm also realizing I'm not taking enough of that Substack writing and turning it into videos here for all of you. So that will change. Next, I'm going to share some prompts for all of you regarding the concept of utopias. I know it seems counterintuitive to think about utopias in a time where they don't really feel possible, but trust me, they are. Follow the chapters below, depending on what you're looking for here, and I'll begin with journaling prompts, end with some creative prompts, and then also share a couple of books that I'm reading. In light of everything going on, I want to propose a different way of trying to look at the world around us. Rather than our common anxiety for the future, what if we spent some time thinking like science fiction authors? Over the last several years, I've gotten real interested in the fantasy of buying some land and building homes and community on it for my friends and loved ones. I look to books for answers when I feel lost. I have been seriously in the thick of thinking and imagining something different. This practice of imagining and dreaming has been the balm for me in times of crisis where my default settings are anxiety and despair. Through Utopias, I have found little glimmers of hope in the midst. So, that is my creative prompt for you today. First, consider journaling. What kind of world would be the most supportive to me and my community? This might be hard to write. If it is for you, take a moment to think visually. Consider how you would want your world to look by saving images online to a folder or your computer, or using something like Tumblr or Pinterest to discover and collect ideas. If you look down in the description, you can find a link to my Pinterest board where I'm doing this exact thing. Next, consider what would it feel like on an ordinary day. For example, I imagine waking up and having coffee in a courtyard garden I share with several other small homes belonging to beloved friends. We would spend the day co-working in a large office studio house that we built collaboratively. Some of us make art, others digitally commute to day jobs. All of us gather for lunch around a big table, munching on leftovers of a giant soup and veggie roast that we cooked up together the weekend before. Next, how could living this way improve or solve some of the problems that you encounter on a day-to-day basis? For example, things like loneliness and isolation. The burden of managing a household as a single family or one or two individuals is tough. What could this look like if you had a collective? Next, consider, are there aspects of this imagined world that you can bring into your daily life? For example, can you host things like soup nights, potlucks, or meal prep nights to make life easier for you and your friends? Can you pool together resources to spend more time in nature on hiking or camping trips with others? It can be really simple. Do you have skills, tools, or other advantages you can offer to your community members or neighbors who might be in need? Next, let's consider our creative practices. All of the utopian imagining that I do lends itself to optimism and hope. I am a human living with both long COVID and depression, so I might as well make hope the center of my worldview. Despair is infectious. Utopian imagining helps me see these ways of living as the eventual goal. This work makes me realize that this doesn't require land or living in the forest. Instead, these dreaming sessions often lead to perfectly achievable expectations in the here and now. I can reach out to and support my community better and help make way for more time to be creative and live as our most authentic selves. Here are some creative prompts on utopias. 1. My first creative prompt for you is, can you draw what you want your world to look like? It could be blueprints, sketches, or even a new organizational structure. Draw a web. What systems or machines are you dreaming up? Don't be limited by practicality here. Instead, try to embrace a sense of imaginative wonder. Next, take a moment to consider your answers to the writing prompts from earlier while outside. How does it feel to meander on these ideas while in nature? My next prompt for you is, when making something with your preferred medium today, consider gifting. Is there a friend in need of something that you could make for them instead of buying it? From knitting socks to baking a fall tart or even designing a new sewing pattern that would fit them marvelously. What might we want to make to share in kind? And lastly, create something small today to cultivate connection. Maybe you choose your drawing inspiration as something an old friend would love and send them a text of the final sketch. You can record a clip of a melody and send it to a lyricist friend and to invite collaboration. Challenge the idea of making alone and use that as an opportunity to connect with others. And as a reminder, if you're resonating with these prompts, I just released an entirely do-it-yourself creative retreat that you can download right on my website. It's really, really great if you're struggling with finding more time to be creative, as it will give you prompts and structures for setting intentions for your creative practice, setting intentions for the time you are going to use to make, and then it'll walk you through 9 optional quests that you can do at a choose-your-own-adventure pace, all designed to help you connect most deeply with your most creative self to persistently bloom. You'll find a link for that in the description below. I am also working on my response to these prompts in my sketchbook in a way that feels really wholesome and a tiny bit silly. I'm making drawings of my favorite buildings and land layouts I've created over the years in The Sims. That game has always been my playground ever since I was a kid, and it is the place for imagining different possibilities and taking off the constraint of money. Thanks to the motherload cheat that gives me 50,000 simoleons anytime I want, no questions asked. Another way that I'm thinking about utopias is in the system I created for evaluating my life and business as an artist by rating each thing based on effort, well-being, and community. I made a whole video on that you can check out right here after this one. Lastly, in service of more human recommendations, here is my list of books for you related to utopias. So that one I mentioned earlier, Monk and Robot by Becky Chambers, it is awesome. They are 2 short novellas that follow the adventures again of a tea monk and in a peaceful solar punk world formed after the robots humans built rebelled and had had enough. So if that sounds cool to you, you'll probably like it. The next one is Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach. It was written in 1975, considering what would happen if parts of the west coast of the United States formed a new country prioritizing sustainability and the climate. Now, it was written in the 70s, so there's some weird stuff in it, but interesting things to consider inside of it. I am not here for the idea of secession, but I do think that there are some really interesting philosophical things going on in this book that make it worth looking at and reading. The next 2 are nonfiction, Everyday Utopia by Kristen R. Ghodsee and Heaven is a Place on Earth, Searching for American Utopia by Adrian Shirk. Both of these are great reads on the history of intentional groups in the US and beyond, working towards collective living, being, and community care. The next one is Creating a Life Together, Practical Tools to Grow Ecovillages and Intentional Communities by Diana Leafe Kristen. It is a step-by-step guide into the legal, social, and political challenges of building an ecovillage with meaningful interviews and history woven throughout. If you are planning on doing this kind of thing, this is the guidebook that you need. And lastly, Emergent Strategy by Adrian Murray Brown. This book, and Adrian Murray Brown in general, changed my life. My entire worldview is filtered through bits and pieces of the philosophy she shares in this book, and it is one that I pick up regularly when I am feeling lost. It uses nature and science fiction to guide new ways in which we should work to organize ourselves as people. So, if you like this video, if you like the idea of these books or want me to talk about The Sims more, I have always thought about maybe potentially making a video about the economics of The Sims 4. So let me know down in the comments. Definitely, if you liked the things that I'm sharing here or you like these prompts, share them with a friend. It means a lot to recommend things to one another as humans. If you want to build community, sign up to the Discord. It's free. And if you want to read my writing, join my Substack. That is also the place where you can access even more prompts and support my work with a monthly donation. Plus, it's where you'll find out about what the Zoom links are for these different sketchbook and creativity clubs that I'm going to be hosting through the end of the year. But this is it for this video. Until next time, stay creative and find your own ways to persistently bloom. Thank you. Bye.
Are you a silly mander?